Hi, welcome back to Jaffe Woodwinds. My name is Ed Jaffe, and we're up here today at Yamaha Artist Services in Midtown, New York. And I'm pleased to say we have services and the time to spend today with one of the great alto saxophonists over the last 40 years. A gentleman who made his name early on with the Lionel Hampton band and then with Nat Adderley for a number of years, with Lewis Hayes in the Adderley Legacy band, and then for many years with Cedar Walton. And of course, he's played with just about everybody you can think of, from Art Blakey, Freddie Hubbard, Horace Silver, you name it. He's got 20 albums of his own, and believe it or not, about 250 as a sideman on other people's works. He's been a very important teacher and a mentor to younger players today, and an author of several important books, which we'll discuss. So it's my great pleasure to have Vincent Herring here with us. And Vincent, thank you so much for being willing to do this today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And spend
Thank you.
the time up here, and also thanking our videographer today, the great woodwind repair artist and wonderful photographer, Tomoji Hirakata. So it's a really fun day up here at Yamaha. So Vincent, you've had a long career already, even though you're still a young man, and you've had so many experiences that I'd like to go into a little bit, especially for our younger players, so they're more aware of what you've done, and also how you accomplished what you have accomplished, because I think there's lessons to be learned there. So if you don't mind, let's just go back a little to the beginning. I know you grew up on the West Coast. And began your musical studies there. So can you, talk briefly about your upbringing there and who some of your important early teachers were?
Well, I've told this story before, but it's an important story. It's part of my legacy of what happened to me. My mother encouraged me to play music, and I had interest in playing the trumpet. Just what I've heard on television or seen something. I thought, man, trumpet was really cool, and that's what I was interested in doing. And I went to the band director, to interview about being in the band. And I asked him, what did he play? And he said, trumpet. He had like sores on his lip, and I looked at that.
Should have been a clue.
I was like, not gonna happen for the kid. So then I thought saxophone might be the better route.
That's funny.
So I sign up for the advanced band. This is in junior high school, and I'd never played a musical instrument before. But from my perspective, I was in a gifted program which had nothing to do with music.
Right, just the intellectual and your academics.
At that age, I wouldn't use the word intellectual, let's just say. I was a hair above most of the kids. And so I signed up for the advanced band, and first day in band, California at that time, they had all the instruments. So whatever you signed up for, if you didn't have the instrument, you go check it out.
And this was a public school.
It's a public school. And I went and I signed up for tenor saxophone. Actually, I wanted alto, but they only had, the alto weren't available, and they needed tenor, so I signed up for the tenor. And I watched how the other guys put it together. I kind of put it together in the mouthpiece. And they have free reeds, everything you needed.
Great.
Sitting there in the section, I'm sitting like everyone else, but I don't really know what's going on. So this is the advanced band. So we're playing a piece, and he stops and he says, saxophones, letter A. It says, tenor saxophones, letter A. You at letter A. I'll play it later in the week. He said, no, play it now. Of course, I couldn't play. I couldn't play one note.
Right.
So I was kicked out of the band and told that I couldn't even enroll in beginning band unless I hired a private teacher. And there was a local music school in the town where I lived, and it was called Dean Friedrich's Academy of Music.
What town was this in?
Vallejo, California.
Okay.
It's a kind of extended East Bay, between Napa and San Francisco. if you can imagine that, but that's where it was. So I signed up for beginning band, and the first saxophone teacher I had actually got killed in a Jeep accident after like 2 or 3 lessons, and then I had a trombone teacher who was teaching me saxophone, but I kind of figured out after a while, wait a minute, this is not right. So there was one saxophone teacher who was more expensive than the others because he came from San Francisco, and his name was David Peterson, but he was a real saxophone player. Looked at his resume, not that I knew anything, but it looked pretty impressive to me. And I want to say the lessons were like $7, maybe 10 or something, but it was more than the others.
Right.
So maybe the others was 7 and his was 10, something like that. And so my mom was like, "Why do you have to study with him?" I said, he's a real saxophone player, be good. So I studied with this guy, David Peterson, and he was really a woodwind specialist. It turns out his dad is also a woodwind specialist. So David was doing a lot of shows, Broadway shows, and work around those kind of things.
But he was a doubler in essence.
Yeah, he was serious doubler, and but he grew up in a musical household from his dad, and so he just had a worldly perspective. And he was the first guy to show me a 2-5-1 voicing on the piano. Yeah.
And you were roughly 14 or so at this time?
11.
11? Oh, you're really young.
Yeah, I was
Okay,
really
okay,
young.
okay.
And I was lucky that I hooked up with David, and that's really where my lessons began. Now, at that age, if you practice a little bit, you get better than everybody else. And maybe I practice, I'm guessing, maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, but really diligently.
That's a lot for a young kid,
Yes,
especially a wind instrument.
Exactly. And so by the time the next year rolled around, I was able to audition and get into advanced band. So, because my motivation was not musical. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a great player. It was like, I'll show them,
Right.
And so I would practice every day. And that was really how I got started. And of course, as I started playing more, I really started enjoying it more and more. And in the 1970s, great period of music for me. I mean, there was just so much great stuff on the radio, and I just longed to hear more instrumental songs and hear what the saxophone could do. And my mother, I grew up in a single parent household. She was a real jazz fan and had a collection of recordings that I had no idea what they were until I started, being a jazz fan, and my friends were like, "Man, you got to check out this Art Blakey record." And I'm like, "Man, I know this record. My mom plays this record all the time." Oh, and there's this Ornette Coleman record. Ornette who? And he plays it. I was like, "Oh, my mom plays that all the time." So I knew all these records. I didn't even realize that I was growing up in that environment.
Right.
And just one thing led to another, and I continued to practice. By then, my motivation was, love of the instrument and wanting to be better. And that's why I did it. And in fact, my first instrument of my own was a Bundy 2. Bundy 2. That's a student model.
Yeah,
instrument.
I mean that's what where I grew up in this New York. That's what we had available to us in the schools. Bundy made a big. I mean that was the purpose, to make instruments that were affordable for the students and were indestructible.
Right, and that's unless you're me. And of course, I was so happy to have it. As soon as I got home, I took it apart because I wanted to know everything about it, and of course I couldn't get it back together where it played well. And so of course my mom was like just beyond upset with me, because now we had to go to a saxophone repair shop,
Right.
and she just bought a brand new saxophone for me. So you know how that went over. And but that was my start, and I started playing that. And as I got a little bit better, now it was time to get a professional instrument. And at the time, the 62 was out, and it was like, so I had all these brochures of the 62, Yamaha 62, and I used to look at those. And then I had the brochures of the Selmer Mark 7. That was the new instrument
Right.
that was out.
Right.
And so my teacher at the time, David
It's still
Peterson,
Dave Peterson.
yeah, he wasn't really too keen on the Mark 7. And so it was like, yeah, the 62 would be good. And I lived in this town, Vallejo, and there was 2 music stores, and neither one of them had the Yamaha or the Selmer.
Huh.
So I was going to go to Best Music and get a Yamaha 62. There was one little tiny store that no one went to. Might have been like a pawn shop / music store. And I went in there just by chance, and the guy has a brand new Selmer Mark 6 in the plastic, never been opened.
Wow.
And I said, excuse me, I'm getting a new horn. Can I try that one out? He said, no. I was like, but I'm going to buy a new horn, and I'd like to try it out. He said, no. And so I called my teacher, and I said, this guy actually in my town has a Selmer Mark 6, and it's in the plastic and everything, but he won't let me try it out. He said, how much is it? Buy it. I said, okay. So I bought it. And it was 216284. That was the serial number.
Yeah.
So that was my first professional instrument.
And at this age, you were about what at this age? 14, 15 maybe?
Maybe 14.
14. That's pretty good to have an instrument of that
Yeah,
caliber
of
by
course.
that time.
Of course, absolutely.
And Dave Peterson was still your teacher. And
Yeah.
and what were your early lessons like? Were they involved with reading standard pedagogical stuff, or did you also play tunes?
Well, it was interesting because Dave, we really worked on woodwind stuff. He tried to get me to play clarinet, and I was like, I don't want to play clarinet. He said, no, it'd be good for you, and I wasn't into it at the time, but I did. I think I bought one and would practice it, but wasn't really into it. But we would work on sound, we would work on saxophone technique, we work on reading. And then, I told him I was, interested in playing jazz. And I remember him having talks with me about, well, if you're a jazz musician, you won't have work opportunities. It'll be very difficult. But if you do Broadway shows, and he was running this whole thing down to
And
me.
that's what he did.
That's what he did,
Right.
And so, but as a kid, it's in one ear, out the other.
Of course.
And so then we started working on jazz a little bit, and I remember him showing me 2-5-1 voicings. So, okay, practice this around the keys, and I practice around the keys. And, things like this was going on. And there was another guy, Billy Browning, which was another saxophonist in the area. He played tenor, and I studied with him a little bit also. He was a really nice guy, and he taught at Sonoma State University.
Mm-hmm.
And me and a few of my friends that were in high school would play in the Sonoma State big band, fill out chairs. And Billy he was very organized. He had all these charts, and you could learn tunes and have a chance to play them in the big band. And he had a little small group. We'd fill out those bands as well. So that was a very good experience. And I was grateful for Dave really getting me reading halfway okay.
Right.
And
you also mentioned, I think, to me earlier about the fact that he imparted to you a great deal of knowledge about breathing and the use of, which is, for younger players, it's rarely taught, because I think most teachers, and I have felt that way, if you have a young student who wants to play the music and you start talking to them about breathing and having them work through that sometimes it's a turnoff for young players and they don't want to do it, but it's the most essential fundamental to really achieve.
I think it's a fault in the education of how we teach young people, because I can remember other teachers saying, breathe in the diaphragm.
Right.
And what the hell is a diaphragm? And they're still doing it today.
100%, and they write it. And I actually have to just say, on my website, I've written an article about how it's physiologically wrong. I mean, the diaphragm is obviously a very important organ and maybe the essential organ in the breathing apparatus, but we have no conscious way of controlling it. We have control over other organs that influence the movement of the diaphragm. So when they say breathe from the diaphragm, you say, well, where is it?
They can't explain it.
No, and you can't touch it, you can't feel it unless you're on an operating table. They've opened you up. So
this is a real problem in
right.
in teaching, and I find it across the board. And when I explain it to college level students, I say, look, I'm not even sure if it's going to be better for you. It's how I learned from the very beginning, and I'll make a guess and say maybe it's 10% better, but I don't know. And I've heard great saxophone players breathe in their chest.
Yes.
I can't breathe in my chest. It just feels weird for me. But I do know great players are doing it and have done it. So, but this is the correct way to do it. And I explain it and I really get into it. And so Dave was very thorough.
So it sounds like you had, even though it's sort of an interesting way of starting, but you had excellent instruction in the early part, which is so important. And in some cases, I'd have to say, the majority of people, young people I've met over the years in my teaching, that most of the early teachings that they received was not excellent. And it's redoing things. And that becomes harder as you get into 18, 19, 20, 25-year-olds and saying, well, let's talk about breathing, let's talk about the use of the tongue, the lips, the whole bit. And it is a difficult subject to reintroduce when someone has played 8, 10, 12 years already. But jumping ahead a little bit, knowing a little bit about your history, early age, 17, you were recruited into the West Point Army Band. Now, to be recruited in at such a young age, you must have really been quite advanced for a young player. I mean, it can't happen any other way. I mean, they could have their choice of anybody.
I'll tell you what happened. And being a parent, I would never suggest this for people, you know. I have 2 kids who are
older
at this point. And I could never imagine a kid going to a university at 16. So, you know, we had some little jazz festivals. And so I was like recruited by a couple schools to come to college. And this one school, Cal State Chico, wanted me to go to school. I'm like, I'm 15. He said, really? Well, if you want to go, we can get you in at 16. I said, no kidding.
Really?
So I was like, yeah, you got to take this test to get out of high school, go right to college. I said, no kidding. I thought, great idea. Yeah. I mean, I think about that with my son. He went to 13th grade. He went to Phillips Exeter for an extra year in high school. And I, as a parent, thought, great idea. Even though you're a perfect student with 4.0, yeah, extra year do you good. I mean, that's how I view it now.
Right.
But at the time, yeah, 15, I'll be 16 soon. Yeah, it'd be a great idea.
I've never heard of that. I mean, I've heard of academic prodigies being, jumping to college.
I was not an academic prodigy.
Well, I've never heard of a music other than like people who, let's say, may have gone to Curtis or Juilliard at a very young age just for that. But into the recruited into the West Point
Well,
Army.
that came next.
Right. That's what's astonishing to me.
First, I went to Cal State University, Chico. And while I was there at Chico, you're reading about jazz and the history of jazz, and it circles through New York. Everything is through New York. All the players I like, the history of everything, the recordings I'm checking out, everything is through New York.
And this is around 1980, right? Right around this time?
Yeah.
Somewhere around 1980?
That figures about right.
Yeah. And sure, New York, the scene was so vibrant.
Well, just also reading historically the scene. So there was auditions for the West Point Band in the Union paper or something. A friend of mine told me about it. I sent in a tape, and from the people that sent in the tape, they whittled it down to a few. And I was surprised they actually called and offered to fly me there for a live audition.
And you're 17 years old.
Maybe.
Maybe 17. That's an
Right.
incredible story.
It is. And
Yeah.
so I went there and I had a live audition. And, you know, thanks to David Peterson, I was a decent reader. And, you know, could I play? Now I would say no, but obviously I could wiggle my fingers a little bit. And,
Sure.
and so I got offered the position. And let me tell you what that entailed. Like today, students are doing these military bands as a career option,
As
and
a
they're
first
good.
choice. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
in fact, you know, I didn't even realize how great it was. I mean, to be in one of those exceptional bands, you go in as I think you go in as an E6 staff sergeant, something like that. Maybe even an E7, I don't remember. And so you go back home. Now you have to enlist in the Army, and you have to do boot camp, the whole thing.
The whole 9 yards. Yeah.
The whole thing, you know, and like, you're not playing when you're in boot camp. It's like your stuff is is locked away in a room, and you're doing real boot camp. You know, the whole thing would. You know, I like to think it was difficult, but I know that there are special forces that go to, you know, to the power of 10 for what we did. You know,
Yeah.
but it seemed like a lot to me at the time, and I would like to point out that I think I was able to do 15 pull-ups, which is something, and probably 100 push-ups.
But you're surrounded by generally guys who are much older. You're living away from home on the opposite part of the country.
But I was already living away from home because I was at Cal State Chico.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So now
I
my
see.
mom was living in Vallejo,
Okay.
which was, I guess, I'm guessing maybe 100 miles away. You know, but
Yeah.
it could have been 10,000 as far
You're
as
right.
I was
Right.
concerned. So now I'm in the real Army.
Right.
And can't play because I have to deal with that. And once I get through that, and you get your orders of where you're going, the drill sergeant who's been putting us through all the training, he might be an E6, and he may have been in the military for 30 years, right? And all of a sudden, this
little kid.
what? He looks at this, he wants to kill you. You know, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Right.
And with the specialty bands, you don't go to music school, you go right to the thing.
Oh. Okay.
Even though I could have used music school for sure. So I went right to West Point, and talking about a budget, they bought, it seemed like, everything ever published. And what did we do from 7 in the morning until whenever we were discharged later that afternoon? We read every chart that came out.
Wow.
That's all we did. And it's like, you know, maybe if you're lucky, you do super sax stuff, you know,
Right.
or some really great Toshiko charts or something,
Right.
or Thad Jones.
Right.
Maybe if you're lucky. But we did everything, you know, everybody you never heard of, or this, and part of that was they were spending the budget. They had a budget to spend, and if they didn't spend it, they wouldn't have it the following year.
Right.
We had instruments.
Excuse me, but this was the post-Vietnam War situation. So I imagine that the budget that was allocated by Congress for the Vietnam Wars, maybe it still stood in place.
I have no idea.
I mean, you're just thinking, how could there be that much overage?
Right.
Well,
that band, the West Point band at that time, was very well funded. So when I first got there, and you check in, they issue you instruments. They issued me a silver and a gold Selmer Mark VI, one for marching band, one for big band. I was like, but I have my own. Take the horns. Yeah, okay, I take the horns, and flute, Haynes flute, buffet clarinet, and just an Army issue. This was,
and you wanted to leave?
you know, all I could think about was going to New York.
Right.
And so I went to New York like almost every day. I'd never seen snow before in my life.
Right.
And I would come to New York and hang out in the clubs and hear music and hear things that were going on. It was just, it was exciting to me.
Now, were you able to study privately during those years? Oh,
I'm
that
getting
time?
to that.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
getting to that. And so this Army situation was amazing. They would pay for you to study with people. They pay for you to go to school, all kind of stuff that you can do because you're not traveling. You're right there at that location. So everyone said, study with Eddie Daniels. I said, who's that? I and then I remember I knew him from Cal State Chico. He did a clinic at Cal State Chico playing alto saxophone.
Well, that was Eddie was one of my teachers, but that was his first instrument before clarinet,
He
before tenor.
sounded great.
Oh,
I've just loved him so much on the alto
yeah.
saxophone. But the guys were telling me to study clarinet with him. It's like, really? Okay. So I went to Eddie for clarinet lessons. I was supposed to go to Joe Allard for just general saxophone stuff, but we talked on the phone. I spoke to his wife. It just never could coordinate it, and somehow it didn't happen. And then I started studying with Phil Woods on the saxophone, and so that was great because I knew who Phil was, and I loved his playing, and I used to see him in San Francisco all the time. So to be able to study with him was great. And I drive all the way out to Delaware, Water Gap,
Yeah.
and that was great. And that was all courtesy of the Army.
Amazing.
It is amazing. When of course, now you know what everything costs to do this and do that, how hard it is. Man, what a great opportunity.
You hit it at the right moment.
Oh, just unbelievable. And so, of course, I couldn't wait to get out. Why? And guys were like, man, do 20 years and then you got retirement and then you could do whatever. I want out now.
Right.
So I was fighting everything I could to get out. But one concert that we did have was with Benny Goodman at A.B. Fisher Hall.
Whoa.
That was the first time I met Mike LaDon, piano player,
Sure.
even though at the time we didn't realize it. And so when we rehearsed with Benny.
And were you playing lead alto at this
Yes,
time?
yeah.
Oh, you were on the hot seat.
Well, Doug Lawrence?
Sure.
Doug Lawrence got a solo in rehearsal. And Doug's a great player, plays in that style.
Absolutely.
And we were like, man, Doug's got a solo, so great, right? So here we are at A.B. Fisher Hall.
I think I know where this may end up.
And Doug's, he's tall, like 6'3".
Yeah.
Goes to stand up. Benny waves him down. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. And so I had, of course, talked to Mike LaDon about this later when we figured out that we were both on that concert. That would have technically been the first time we played together. And so it was just great from that perspective, having those.
A lot of opportunities.
Yeah, a lot of blown opportunities, but.
Right.
So when I got out, I got a job at a company called Penton Software, which was 420 Lexington Avenue. And we were selling software. We were selling one product. It was called Maintenance Master. When I would leave work, I would hear these bands playing on the street. And I was getting farther and farther away from playing music, but I really wanted to play music. And I would hear these bands playing on the street, and I would sit in with them. I started bringing my horn, and I would sit in with them. And those guys said, yeah, man, you should come and play with us. I was like, well, when I get out of work, and they were like, yeah, come play with us, And so something happened, and I got laid off, or I had an opportunity to leave. I do remember getting unemployment, so maybe I got laid off. And so then I used that as an opportunity to play with these bands on the street. And I did that for a while. And of course, I was practicing. I had a little money saved. And I was just practicing, playing with the band on the street, practicing.
And who were the people that you were listening to at this time who maybe were most influential in giving you a focus or giving you a direction?
You know, I was always into Cannonball, Phil Woods, Charlie Parker. You know, it was this kind of style that I really enjoyed. And of course, there were other players out there, but this was a style that I gravitated towards. There was John Handy, who lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had a chance to hear him. And so I really liked John Handy. You know, he was one of the first players I heard. But this was, you know, basically what I would listen to. You listen to the radio station, whatever they played. Occasionally I'd hear some people I thought were special. And then I would check them out. But this was pretty much the fare of what I would check out. So when I started playing on the street, there was another guy named Larry Smith. And Larry Smith sounded very much like Sonny Stitt. And
Wow.
he played really, really great. Really tremendous.
Was he an alto player or a tenor
player?
player?
Yeah, he was alto. And he played just like Stitt. And I remember asking him for a lesson. And how much for a lesson? He said, buy me a turkey sandwich and a Coke. I said, okay, we can work that out. And he was just a great player. And I was just shocked at how good he was. He was playing on the street. And man, this is just introduction to New York. I met a lot of interesting people. Dexter Gordon used to stand there and watch us play all the time.
And you knew who he was?
I knew him because I heard him in San Francisco at the Keystone Corner. And in fact, I walked up to him and I said to him, hi, Mr. Gordon, do you remember me? And he was like, no. But he would stand there all the time and listen to us. Woody Shaw, he sat in with us once. He just whipped his horn out and played with us. Kenny Garrett was a peer, and he sat in and played with us. You know, I met some interesting people. Sahib Shahab, when he came back from Europe, he, gave us some money once, and he says, I play saxophone. My name is Sahib Shahab. Do you know who I am? I said, yeah, I know exactly who you are. Because I had a record called The Four Altos. It was with Phil Woods, Gene Quill, Sahib Shahab, and Hal Stein, who was one of my saxophone teachers.
Yeah.
I forgot. Hal Stein was one of my teachers, and when I lived in Vallejo, I used to take the bus to Oakland, California, which is where Hal lived, and I would study with Hal in addition to David Peterson.
Right.
So Hal was like total jazz. David Peterson was like everything woodwind.
Yeah. Well, just hearing this bit about your early years and your upbringing and study, it's very clear that you're a very studious type of person, and you were from the very beginning. You were interested in learning more, and you sought influences, whether it was, because you had to initially to just get into the original band, but even coming to New York, you were interested, and the Army made certain situations available to you. But it sounds like you were always interested in finding out and curious. I guess that's the right word. That you were always curious about deciphering more and learning more, and went to people and sought out people who you felt could help you in that direction.
Well, especially once you get to New York and you're exposed to players that are much better than you. And, my perspective of when I get to New York, these players are going to hear me and they'll be talking about me, And of course, I hear a guy playing on the street. He sounds like Sonny Stitt. I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I remember there was a saxophone player when I started playing with Lionel Hampton. There was an alto player named Adam Brenner.
Oh, I
you
knew
know
him.
Adam?
Yes.
And and Adam, played alto at the time.
He also
and
really
I
good
remember
tenor.
hearing out, and he played like Sonny Stitt. I was like, oh my God, what's going on? All these guys are too good, man.
Yeah.
And so, curiosity, because, at that point, your ego gets deflated and you realize, no, you're not that good, and you have much study to do. So, I was very diligent in working on things, and I befriended a guy named Pete Yellin, and
Also one of the great alto players,
yeah,
underrated and unfortunately maybe forgotten, but
not
and,
forgotten by me.
yeah, but by a lot of people who really knew it, and a wonderful guy, and he was a wonderful teacher, and really he started that jazz program up at LIU, Long Island
Well, let me tell you
University
what happened.
in New York.
So Pete and I became really good friends, and he said, "You got to go back to school." That's okay. So he gets me into school at LIU. I'm there, and we're hanging all the time. He's teaching me things and turning me on to players, and he's like, "You don't like Mike Brecker?" I'm like, "He's okay." He's like, "He's really good." I'm like, "Yeah, he's okay." And so Pete just couldn't believe this. He says, "I'm going to bring him in next semester to play with your ensemble."
Oh my gosh.
Okay, you know. So Mike comes in, nicest guy you ever want to meet. He says,
Yes.
"Pete told me so much about you. I'm really looking forward to hearing you play." And, this is Mike, right? So,
Yeah.
and so he comes up to my ensemble. He says, "Tenor Madness, is that okay?" I said, "Sure." He starts playing. A little tear comes in my eye. I was just like, "Oh my God," I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it was shocking.
Yeah, I think he had that effect on a lot of
Oh
people.
my God. And so, of course, I packed my horn up, and Pete's like, "Aren't you going to play?" I just sat there. I could not. Nice guy, too.
Yeah, yeah. It is a shocking thing, especially the first time. It's
Oh,
uh, I remember years ago we started. I was in Juilliard doing a master's degree, and a couple of guys, the sax players, really initiated starting up a big band, an informal band, and somehow I guess we knew, and we had played with Paul Jeffrey, and Paul came up
mhm.
and sort of headed up the band. This is all informal, we did it. It wasn't a formal class. It was just we were trying to play. And then we finished rehearsal one night, and Paul said, "Come on, let's go down." I think it was the half note. Was the half note? I think it was the half note at the time. He said, "Let's go down. We'll hear the greatest saxophone player in the world." And we're thinking, well, who's down there? We don't. I'm telling you, he's the greatest saxophone player in the world. And we thought maybe it's George Coleman. We're going to hear, one of the greatest, and it was Mike Brecker.
Yeah.
And Paul said, "I'm telling you, this guy is the greatest saxophone player in the world." And I don't think he was wrong.
And
But yeah, I know that feeling, and it must have been shocking, but also terribly motivating.
more depressing.
Uh,
It reminds me of like first time I heard Freddie Hubbard, and my friends at school that said, "Was it inspiring?" I said, "No, it was just depressing, man." Because you realize that he's at a level that no one's gonna get to. It's just like,
it's funny. I just remembered one of my old teachers I mentioned earlier, Eddie Daniels. There was a record he made while I think on tour in Europe, Thad and Mel, and and it ended up coming out as Freddie's record, "The Hub of Hubbard."
Mhm.
And on that album, they did just one of those things
Sure.
at an incredible tempo. And I said, "Eddie, did you know coming into the date you were going to do?" He said, "No." He said, "I didn't even know the tune." He said, "I just try to hang in there." He said, here's why I'm bringing this up. He said, "But no one can play tempos like Freddie."
No.
I mean, even Eddie, who's one of the greatest musicians I've ever met,
Yeah.
ever, he was awed by Freddie's ability, and especially his time and ability to create at those tempos.
Yeah, unbelievable. And I had a chance to play with Freddie a few times, and yeah, the incredible musician.
Now, I mentioned earlier some of your credits where, obviously you mentioned playing with Lionel Hampton, and then, of course, with Louis Hayes.
Actually, the first band that I had a chance to do was Buddy Rich's band, and
Oh.
I tell you what happened. Guy says, "You have a credit card?" I said, "No. Why do I need a credit card?" He said, "Because he sometimes fires the second alto player if he gets mad at the lead player. I'm like, why would he fire me? He says, that's just how he works, man. He might get, you know, they show you how tough he is if he fires somebody that can easily be replaced. And so I just didn't like hearing that, and it just made me a little nervous. And then around the same time, Lionel Hampton needed a saxophone player and had auditions, and so I, you know, I got the opportunity to do that. Now, you know, there's pros and cons to doing those things. Overall, I'll say it was a good experience. And, you know, I don't look at it as a lifetime, you know, job. It's just.
But you were probably the youngest guy in the band at that time, I would imagine.
Probably.
Yeah.
You know.
But I mean, traveling with older musicians and just traveling internationally, I would imagine as well.
Well, that was, you know, it's funny. Like with Lionel Hampton, when we traveled, we didn't have single rooms. We would have, you know, at least 2 to a room. And some of us, to save money, were like, okay, man, we'll take the mattress off the bed and you got the floor. And that way, you know, to save money at these, you know, terrible hotels we would stay in. And so his one good gig at the time was the Meridian Hotel in Paris, France. And they had the Lionel Hampton Jazz Room in the hotel. And it was I think it was a 4-star hotel at the time. And he would play there for 2 weeks. So that was great. Single rooms.
Sit down for 2 weeks.
Yeah. In Paris. That was my first trip to Europe. So of course it was a great gig. And yeah, so my time with Hamp was good. You know, guys, I always complain about the money and stuff. You know, I played at the White House with Ronald Reagan was president. Jesus Christ, man. Ronald Reagan was president. And when we played, I made $85. And I was running late before when the bus was leaving, and I had to park my car in a parking lot, which at the time was probably $20 or $25. So I was pissed. And then when we played a Christmas party, there was a great room where they had chefs from around the world, and you'd stop at one station, they prepare something, right? And so the road manager said, no one is allowed to go there. And I was like, for the money I'm making, I'm going. And so a few of us went anyway. And I had a spectacular meal at the White House, and then went back to the room and you know, and played the dance or whatever it was.
Yeah. And
I remember Ronald was right in front of me because I was in the middle of the saxophones. And that was my Lionel Hampton experience.
Yeah. Well, but, I mean, and that was the beginning of, like we mentioned earlier, many years as a sideman, you know, with Nat Adderley, Lewis Hayes, Cedar Walton. So over all these years as a sideman, ultimately, I wonder how you feel those years working with all these great artists prepared you to be a leader, because you've now issued 20 somewhat albums as a leader, which is a formidable amount.
Well, certainly then I was not recording. Like one of the first jobs I got was Horace Silver. And the way that happened, there was a club called the Jazz Cultural Theater. Barry Harris used to have a.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and he used to teach there and had a jazz club.
It was a wonderful club.
Yeah, I used to go by to the little classes all the time.
Yeah.
And check it out. But I really couldn't play. You know, I really couldn't. I mean, could wiggle my fingers, but I really couldn't play. And I was playing a blues and sounded halfway okay on a blues. And Horace Silver heard me. And he said, man, you sound good. If you play tenor, I'll hire you for my band. I was like, I'm really a tenor player. Give me your number. And so then I got hired for that job.
And had you played much tenor at that time? Did you own a tenor?
I didn't own a tenor. I borrowed one from Branford Marsalis, and I got a mouthpiece from Ralph Moore. And I went to practice it. Sounded horrible. Call up Branford, says, man, something's wrong with his horn. It's like, nothing's wrong with the horn, bro. And I call up Ralph, man, your mouthpiece is. He said, Really? Bring it back. I went over there. I said, man, I tried playing it. It's like, he played it. Sounded great. I was like, I'm in deep doo-doo. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then Don Brayton got the gig with Wynton Marsalis. And Wynton was buying Don Selmer Mark VI. And Don sold me his Yamaha 52 saxophone. So I gave Bramford his Mark VI back, and I had this 52, and I was practicing it, practicing, trying to, I still sounded terrible on it. So,
Now, do you think, because, I mean, from your perspective, you sounded terrible. I'm sure it sounded pretty good. But the point is, you were an alto player, and your ears were developed as an alto player. Do you think that had the effect when you picked up the tenor, a bigger horn, different, the reed field, the mouthpiece feels different, the angle is different because of the way the necks are positioned?
that was one of the problems. For me, I hadn't really developed thorough understanding of harmony and how to play changes really well. It was getting to it. I was learning, but I really wasn't thorough enough to be on a sophisticated gig like Horace Silver, which was pretty demanding for that. And on top of it, I'm playing this horn. So it was a mess. And it was a job that, man, I wish I had it like 2 years later. By then I could, kind of play, but at the time, I really was not a good player. But I did the job. And that was, while working with Horace, I met Cedar Walton, because at one jazz festival, I knew Nat Adderley already, and Nat Adderley was running a session at this jazz festival, and Cedar Walton was in the band. And so I played alto. I had my alto with me, and that was where I met Cedar Walton. And so first job I did with Cedar was a week at the Village Vanguard. And at the end of the week, he said, yes, you're very promising, but not ready yet. That was what he said to me, exact words. He said, I'll call you again one day. That was it, right?
Wow.
Done. And it was a blow to the ego, but by then I knew he was right. I knew there was quite some holes in my playing, and so he was absolutely right.
And so what did you do at this point to sort of mend the fences, to sort of acquire that knowledge that you felt intuitively you were missing, and that you were being told by some legends?
I was still going to LIU,
right,
and I was studying with Pete Yellin privately, and Pete was a good player, and so Pete was helping me to address some of those holes in my playing. From when I studied with Phil Woods, I continue studying with Phil. Phil, like lessons with Phil Woods, Phil would play almost all piano the whole time. And so, like, I remember the first lesson, thirds and sevenths through the chords.
All the things you are, yeah.
I was like, why is he holding all the good stuff from me, man? He should be teaching me some hot licks or whatever, And so I remember those things. And so I started getting stuff together at that time, but, thrown into the frying pan with Horace Silver was premature. I wasn't quite ready for that. And then with Cedar Walton, again, I wasn't quite, it was getting there, but not quite ready for it. And so, Cedar was just blunt with me. You promise I'll call you again one day. So by the time Cedar called me again, I was actually ready. I actually could play. And
these were all in alto, the gigs.
These were alto. So in the interim, I was working with Nat Adderley, right? It wasn't as demanding, the harmonic sophistication of the gig wasn't as demanding as somebody like Cedar Walton or Horace Silver. So I could kind of get through that. I was doing better with that. And it was really a great gig for me. I really loved Nat, and I loved Cannonball. I knew that music. So it was a kind of a perfect situation for me, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
So let me just stop here for a second. Now, during this time when you're getting yourself more together with the horn, with the music, with the understanding of the harmonic implications and relating to the melody, and letting that infiltrate your playing, you were doing a lot of practicing.
Oh, absolutely.
Night, and just for the young players to give an idea of how much would you say you were practicing every day? I mean,
Okay.
if you could sum it up. I mean, not necessarily specific
No,
amount
no,
of hours, but just, you know.
this is a very important thing.
Yeah.
And you know, you take 100 human beings. They're not. We always teach everyone's created equal. Everyone's not created equal. There's different levels of intelligence, and some people are going to be able to grasp things in a different way. And you know, like working with Nat Adderley, of course, I'd ask him a million questions about Cannonball and what they practice and how they did this. You know, you guys played a wrong note on this, and you know, and so we really went through it. And from talking to Nat, he said Cannonball didn't practice much. I said, "Come on, Nat, that's impossible." he said, "Man, Cannon barely practiced." I said, "Nat, that's impossible."
But at one time, he must have.
I said, "That's impossible." He said, I said, "What do you call not a lot?" He says, 2 hours a day, maybe 3 occasionally. I said, "Really?" He said, Nat was in awe of Cannonball. He said, "This guy was so smart. Anything he ever heard, he could play it already in every key. Never has to take his horn out. It'd be a year later. Hey, you remember such and such tune? Oh, yeah." And it's like us listening to a AM radio and we hear some song, we can sing it
Right.
every key right away.
Yeah.
And
he just had that instinctive.
and so he had that connected with himself.
But we also know he was an incredibly intelligent human being,
Well,
as well. I mean, besides the musical thing, you know, very articulate.
Sure. And so this all goes hand in hand, you know. And so when I say all people are not creative, all people are not, you know. And you know, from having kids, I'm sure you know my son is, you know, really gifted in math. My daughter is not, but you know, she graduated at Columbia Journalism School, so she's always been smart with words and language, and speaks multiple languages for an American, which is unusual.
Yes.
And so you know, people have different gifts, you know, and so you know, I was just around people with amazing gifts. So practice for me, first of all, I was fairly organized with my practice.
Now, was that something that you learned through your early studies with Dave Peterson, how to be organized, or were you just that way innately?
I think a lot of that was myself, and trying to think, actually, you know, like from looking at old notes. I remember I have a journal from when I used to study with Phil Woods, but I don't think that journal was something that he dictated. I think
you took it upon yourself.
I think it was something that I did myself.
Yeah. And by the way, I also did that with all my teachers. No one told me to do that. And you know, looking back at those notes now, some 40, 50, 55 years later, it's incredibly valuable.
Oh yeah.
And somehow I think that literally writing down notes after a lesson to yourself of what you need to do, what you want to do, what you're weak at, I think the physical act of writing that down, and I'm saying this for our listening audience, I think that helps the learning experience that much more, takes it to another level. The fact that you are writing down, articulating it in your own words, it takes on an added importance. And I'm sure that must have done that for you. And
yeah, well, it's just good to have a journal. Every time I got ready to practice, I'd go back and say, oh, I need to do this and need to do that. So I say all of that to say that my practice was efficient. All right. Now, before I got to New York, when I was a kid, you know, really early, it's 2 hours-ish. But later, in the late days of high school, it got to be a marathon situation where on the weekends, it was definitely an 8 to 10 hour day. During the school year, you would think that you don't have a lot of time to practice. I probably didn't had I not neglected studies the way I approached them the way I should. I somehow found 4 to 6 hours, and let me describe that. I'd get up before school, go to the garage, practice in the garage for an hour or two. Now remember this because it'd be dark out, right? And I felt like I was doing something, right? And then at school, we'd have marching band, and one of my free periods, I'd take and go practice there. After school, I'd practice. At one point, I had a job in a music store, and I would, I could do my homework when no one's in there, kind of thing. And then when the store would close, I had the little Jamie Ingersoll records, blasting them, practicing. So I just was obsessive
Yes.
with my practice routine.
And I think for any musician working in any discipline of music, I have found that to be the case. And you know what? It's not that different from the world-class athletes. When you hear them,
Yeah.
you investigate, how did they become these world-class athletes? How did Michael Jordan get to be Michael Jordan?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of time spent in the gym, early morning, late night, before everyone else gets there, and staying after everyone is there. And he did that as a pro with the Bulls. They still say he was the first one in and last one out.
They talk about it.
Yeah.
My son played Division I. Well, he played Ivy League ball, and so these are the kind of things that we did to get him in a position to be a recruited athlete, Division I athlete, and it was involved. It involved me too, because I'd have to get up to
chaperone him,
to chaperone him a little bit.
Yeah.
But I understood what it meant,
Right.
because I equated it very much to what I was doing, and I knew that this was necessary for him of normal athleticism to have a chance to compete with people that were superior athletes. He'd have to be intellectual. He'd have to be do things in a different kind of way, and he was able to do that. So I got those things.
Right.
And so with my practice routine, I would say on average of an organized, really, really good practice, I would say 6 hours, but it would take me 9 hours to do 6 hours.
Got it. And in those hours of practicing, how much was devoted to working on the fundamentals regarding playing saxophone itself, and how much was towards the music itself, towards developing your jazz conception?
Different at different times. When I would understand that I had problems, things I couldn't do, I was trying to learn how to play voicings on the piano to bring out different chord qualities, chord progressions, and learn how to play through those. I would adjust my routine to address my weaknesses. And I do that with students still. I said, I encourage them to start a journal, a practice journal. And everyone is not going to have to practice the same thing, because, for instance, as a kid, I had a good sound right away, probably because of David Peterson. And I had a good sound right away that I liked, and it was inspiring to me because it was pretty good sound. So I was never a person that did long tones forever, even though I wonder if Dave does long tones. Probably does, because he played oboe and stuff. He probably does. But I was never a person to do long tones. And yet, how do I have a good sound? So it's like my practice routine would be different from some other people. Right. Other guys I know, they said, man, I have to do that an hour a day. I'm like, right. I could never imagine doing that an hour a day.
Right.
So it's always different,
right.
From that perspective. Some people have incredible ears, some do not, Yes. So your needs are different.
Yes.
And so this is, in terms of what I would practice,
right.
It would be adjusted to what I didn't know and what I couldn't do.
Right.
Those things would be.
So that keeps evolving.
Yeah.
And it's still right. I would imagine
Yeah.
it's amazing. As you get older, you think, well, I'll have that much more together, and then you realize there's that much more to keep learning.
Yeah, I still practice quite a bit. I'll say on average, on a low day, 4 hours. On a good day, 6 hours.
Right. And here's someone who's well established, well known, well regarded, and you've been playing your horn 50 years, let's say, something or more than that, and it's still that you find you want to practice too. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the other thing. People, think of practicing as there's a sort of negative connotation. I think of it as just that's the most fun I ever have is practicing. I love to practice.
Well, it's just something I do. It's just part of my life,
Yeah.
part of my
It
makeup.